Good afternoon. I think it's already there. Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to the FWPA Economics Program Webinar Series 2024. Again, I'd like to give some bit background here. Forest and Wood Product Australia is an industry-owned not-for-profit organization. We are one of the 15 rural research and development corporation. We partner with the Australian government and the industry stakeholders and invest in research and development and marketing to improve our industry profitability, productivity, competitiveness, and sustainability. Before starting, the spirit of conciliation, FWPA acknowledge the traditional custodian of country throughout Australia. We acknowledge the connection to the land and the custodianship of country and forests. We pay our respect to elders past and present, and extend that respect to all Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people. I think bits of background about this webinar too. FWPA Economics Program provides and regularly updates the industry data, information, analysis, and market research. And specific for this webinar, I think there's some key points or bullets point we'd like to discuss. First, the timber industry have experienced challenging year at the moment with the slowing demand and reduce the production capacity. We have the initiative of the increasing of housing supply. One of the programs, I think, to increase the supply for 1.2 million houses in the next 5 years. We also have this timber industry capacity to contribute. So the industry welcome this, then want to be part of the solution. But there's a concern that in the supply chain, in the dwelling construction, there's a market failures, and there's no clarity what's the intervention for the market. I'd like to share the key takeaway from the webinar one. I think that's part of the discussion today. It's the expert from the property market say it's likely the price of housing prices is likely to keep increasing. So there will be supply and demand imbalance for the next, not just couple of years, probably next 5 or in the next decade. That's what she said. She said, but strong word that it's better buy than build. So I think that's the current condition of the current market. In terms of the demographic, there's a perspective from population and migration intakes. And she also said that to address this issue, we must innovate. We must innovate to fill this increasing cost, especially with the skilled workers. Then the timber industry will, at the end, for our industry, we will play the crucial role for the supply chain of housing. For this webinar, we already have our panel expert. First speaker is Nathan Calder. Nathan is the Queensland State Sales Manager at the AKD Softwood. Second speaker, we have Karl-Heinz Weiss. Karl is the WoodSolutions Special Advisor and also the Director of Weiss Insights. We have also Craig Kay, the National Product Engineer Tilling Timber, and Andrew Dunn. Andrew Dunn is the CEO of the Timber Development Association. Thanks everyone for your availability for this webinar. Really appreciate it. And we're looking forward to share your insight and view. Without further ado, I think I'd like to introduce the first speaker, Nathan Calder. Nathan is an experienced sales leader with 20 years of experience and track record of high performance in strategic business transformation, sales, and acquisition integration. In his senior role right now, he's been developing high-performing sales within the team and helping a customer to achieve business success. Nathan held the Bachelor of Commerce from the University of Queensland and also MBA from the Southern Cross University. Without further ado, Nathan, please present your presentation. Thank you.
Thanks, Eric. How's that look? All good?
All good? Yep. You can show.
All right.
Yep.
Beautiful. All right. Well, thank you, Eric, for having me along into the FWPA. Today, I'll be providing a bit of an outline and touching on the current state of the market from the perspective of AKD. I'll touch on international trade and the impact on the Australian housing industry and domestic suppliers. I'll have a quick chat about the 1.2 million houses, the bold goal that's been set, and I'll talk a little bit about government incentives and what AKD would like to see. So if I kick off, firstly, I wanted to say AKD's primary product segment is structural timber. So we're heavily reliant on the housing sector. And if I dive right into the current state of the market, I guess the one word that comes to mind is frustrating. It's particularly frustrating for myself as a sales manager and for AKD as a business. On one hand, we have these great fundamentals that are strong. We have immigration, we have low rent availability, we have numbers of people per home declining, all these great drivers, lead indicators that AKD as a business track that typically is a recipe for great growth and housing approvals and commencements. Sadly, on the other side of the coin, we have high interest rates, which isn't new news and is absolutely crushing consumer confidence and crushing approvals and commencement. So it is a problem. What is AKD seeing? We're absolutely seeing a reduction in demand. And as a result of that reduced demand, so AKD has 6 sawmills across the country. We've had to reduce production rates at all mills, including a mill closure in Illawarra. We've implemented storage facilities or increased storage across the eastern seaboard. And as most businesses are going through, the inflationary pressures at the same time we're trying to cope with.
Would you like to share your slides?
Oh, sorry, that's what. So they're not being slide. Okay. Share. So I'll go for that. Let's try again. How's that?
No, we haven't seen that. Yeah, I think all good now. You can continue.
Apologies for that. If I quickly close that off, given you just seeing this slide for the first time, what it's created is a divergence in the market as well. So you're seeing record population growth as per the slide, and a trend down in housing approvals. So have we seen a soft landing? So what AKD is currently talking about is, given the anemic approvals and commencements that we're seeing, should demand actually be lower? My view is that yes, potentially yes. And that this huge pipeline of work that was created throughout COVID is actually providing a bit of a buffer at the moment. The HIA graph that you see on the table, the black bar chart, you can see that houses under construction almost doubled over the last couple of years and are forecast to start to flow through to the market or decrease. So the question we're often talking about within AKD is, how long does this pipeline of work support demand and support our sales? Glass half full is that volume will see us through to the next industry catalyst, whether it's an interest rate cut or whether it's a shift in policy from the government. The glass half empty is that this will finish sooner than we hope, And referring back to the first slide, we will have to look at further production reductions from our mills around the country. So allow me to digress a little bit from the housing industry. I wanted to touch on non-structural products. This is particularly important for sawmills. So 20 to 40% of our production is non-structural products. The main segment for that product is pallet and packaging markets. So pallet and packaging goes into, typically goes into discretionary spend. So it can be household goods or beer or soft drink, anything that requires a pallet. So late in 2023 and certainly early in 2024, we've seen this market soften considerably. So it was no surprise when last week, if you see the AFR data on the right there, which I snipped out the AFR from the ABS, that household goods were down negative 3.2% for the first quarter of 2024. And consumer confidence continues to be very low. Why is this important? This is important because for a sawmill, we need to sell the entire log. And when pricing, if we're not getting a return on investment on the entire product, it can have an impact on capital investment. It can have an impact on the structural pricing as well. So I just wanted to call this out and highlight the importance of the pallet market. Right now, we're seeing soft conditions in structural and soft conditions in non-structural. So international trade, positive or negative. So from AKD's perspective, timber is the ultimate renewable. We want houses in Australia being built with timber. Domestic sawmills can't supply enough timber for the housing industry. So reputable timber import companies have a very important role to play in the Australian housing industry. So sort of big tip. If I quickly touch on COVID, I think the most recent cycle was extremely difficult for all industry participants. You can see on the graph that as quickly as demand grew, it evaporated. And I think the industry as a whole did its best to manage that. However, there were obviously consequences, whether it be lack of return on investment on capital or stock, that everyone had to work through. Notwithstanding, AKD sees opportunities for the industry to manage the cycle better. So what does that look like? Stable pricing would be great. Every upcycle sees pricing escalate, and that's typically driven by the international markets. Now, timber is a global commodity, so how we escape that, I don't know. But that would create stability and consistency in the domestic market. In every upcycle, as prices increase, we find that less reputable importers will source wood wherever they can from any source. We have a concern around the quality of this fibre that enters Australia as a result of that, and the impact that it has on the reputation on timber and building products. And that impacts domestic producers, but also established importers as well. Lastly, the change of cycle. So as quickly as it gets busy, as the graph shows, it gets quiet, and it makes it very difficult on domestic suppliers to manage, to forecast and to plan. The entire supply chain will be carrying stock, and how we can better manage that cycle would be beneficial. So the quest for 1.2 million homes. Look, right now, with the information we have, we can't see how it could be done. The supply chain restraints need to be taken into consideration. They're real. The lack of skilled labour is real. It's not press. It's not You know, it's not fear mongering. You know, we're living it, and we see our customers living it, and we see our customers' customers living it. If I take it to an extreme, back in COVID, we certainly saw firsthand the whole channel expand to double shifts or builders putting on third and fourth teams. The regular outcome, yes, you know, in isolated areas, it worked, but the unplanned nature and expansion of that work really led to an erosion of profitability and productivity. And quite often what we saw was a shift very quickly back to their, I guess, their historical sort of production rate. The core reason and feedback we had was around skilled labor. And that doesn't mean that, in part, that is also the training. There was no training or time allowed for that. So what we're advocating for there is planning, which is the last bit to this slide. You know, what would AKD prefer? So sustainable growth, consistency, take a long-term view. How do we shift away from the boom-bust narrative? You know, I'm sure this goes for most companies, but ramping up and down a sawmill is not easy. Trucks, forestry, people. Lastly, and I'm starting to run out of time. So government intervention, you know, what incentives are we looking at from the government? So first and foremost, we're after a collaborative approach, you know, a harmonised view or approach from federal, state, local. And keep in mind, how do we prevent this boom-bust narrative? How do we keep making history or prevent history repeating? How do we boost consumer confidence? You know, we'd love to see that. Without doubt, consumers are scared. You know, it's regularly in the press around builder insolvencies. And I think this is also supported by feedback we're getting from builders at the moment, where spec homes are being sold almost immediately. However, we're seeing approvals and commencements continue to decline. So the fundamentals are there, the demand is there, but the confidence is hit in the new build process. So how do we reinstate that? What does that look like? I touched on it earlier, capital incentives. You know, how do we continue to drive capital investment during a down cycle? I've been blown away by the investment I've seen across the industry over the last few years. It's just a phenomenal amount of money and amazing. You know, I know later we're going to talk about innovation and technology. It's been incredible, and the productivity that will flow from that will only, you know, hold the industry in great stead in the future. But how do we continue that level of investment in a down market? A more measured approach. Again, how do we shift away from the boom-bust narrative? The last point I will leave you with is, you know, we get lots of data on demand, you know, terrific data, approvals, commencements. How does the government or ABS, how do we capture inventory better? It would be a huge boon to AKD, and we think other suppliers and into other importers. How do we understand how much fibre is sitting at all steps of the supply chain? And that's about me. Thank you all for listening, and I appreciate, Eric, the invitation.
Thanks, Nathan. Short and clear, and I put some notes here about the lack of data inventory and supply. That's probably good notes for FWPA while we developing this new data dashboard. And I put some notes about the uncontrolled expansion. You know, it's not easy for us ramping up, ramping down, and the narrative of the boom bust is very good note for us. Thanks, Nathan. Appreciate that again. Next speaker is Karl-Heinz Weiss. A bit background of Karl. Karl is a trained and qualified master cabinet maker and joiner. He is globally recognized for his groundbreaking work in applying engineered timber for construction as a co-founder of KLH UK. Some of the delivering landmark projects include the State House Murray Grove in London, Kingsdale School in London as well, and Open and City Academy Norwich, UK. In his current executive leadership as a head of research and development and technical director at the FMA, Lendlease Digital, Karl has been a key collaborator of the future of the building. So if you heard about the CRC Building 4.0, but a research initiative, I was there. And currently he is a research associate at the University of Melbourne Infrastructure Engineering Department and a professor of practice in architecture at Monash University Art, Design and Architecture Faculty. Karl, give it to you.
Thank you, Eric. As you may have picked up, there was a bit of a mix-up in that little summary of my background. I'm no longer with Lendlease, left about a year and a half ago. So we should have gone through in more detail before exchanging that. But firstly, I want to just echo your welcome to country as well. And I'm dialing in from the Guringai country, and want to pay my respect to the elders past, present, and emerging. And let me share my screen. So I think that's now working. Do I see this correctly?
Yeah, it's working, Karl.
Just give me a second. Oops, not sure. So, Eric, you've given me an interesting title, and obviously I'm not a sawmiller. I'm not deeply in that space. However, my uncle was actually a timber wholesaler, which gave me quite an interesting insight as well, how these kind of operations work. The title Timber Supply Chain Challenges, Opportunity and Future Housing, actually there are 4 different topics in there. We should spend actually a couple of days on these topics, but I thought I will break down a couple of these words in the description, and probably start straight away with the timber supply chain. Typically, I jump on challenges and opportunities, but I think that's coming out anyway in the next few slides. So if we look into what is actually supply chain, we use that meanwhile as a common word everybody understands. But a supply chain, even if we try to kind of limit it to timber, supply chain includes every step involved in getting a finished product or service to the customer. And we should be always conscious about that. So there is, even we supply 2x4s into the market, they will end up as a finished product, and they will go to a customer if there's a customer. So it's always kind of, important to understand. And I want to just kind of comment on a few things from a previous speaker in terms of demand and market. I think we have to be clear what kind of market scenario do we wishing for, and do we want a push market or a pull market? And what we see in lots of the housing discussion is actually the product requirements are changing. So our current product we're delivering to the market doesn't meet market demand. So that's an important one to understand. And we heard that magic number 1.2 million, and I hear a lot of people automatically pressing the panic button. So we're hearing it, we won't be able to deliver. So, and there's always a good rationale behind that, why we won't be able to deliver. I've been growing up in the southern part of Germany where there's a saying, geht nicht, gibt's nicht, is the German phrase, but saying nothing is impossible. So let's kind of, unpack and look into how can we, or could we actually deliver 1.2 million homes, which is significantly more than we're currently delivering. And again, being conscious as well of the product requirement is changing. So if we look at statistics and economics, and Eric, you're an expert in that space, we always look historically. Yeah. because that's our data set is historically, and it's not taking into account change in the future. So very often people say, to deliver 1.2 million in government is right up there, federal and state governments. We just have to increase productivity, which subsequently the definition of productivity improvement is doing more in the same time frame. And I hear already the supply chain say, but what? So productivity, the productivity conversation is always output focused. At the same time, we heard the word efficiency. Yeah, what does efficiency mean? It's doing the same or more in less time. Good point. And it's better utilizing actually the resources we have got to hand. In a nutshell, you could say that's actually input and resource focused. So we have got these two angles to look at: input and output. The 1.2 million conversation is politicians are always interested in output, showing great numbers. But there is something in the middle. There's something happening there. Obviously, we talk about here in this case construction. In a different language, you could say it's actually a conversion process. You convert the input to a product, which then forms a how. So again, important to understand the process, having materials going into that conversion process. And so we look into trades requirements, skills, equipment, we look into time. And there is probably one of the big challenges we see. Again, we're looking at input-output tension. And again, as a lot of people tend to, we are grabbing and using buzzwords and offsite and prefab and modular. And just last week, I went to the Build in Sydney, the Build Expo, was listening to the New South Wales government, and you hear all these words. Volumetric, modern methods of construction, you hear DFMI. But what's not recognized in that case, whilst this might be a solution, or maybe a solution, it actually represents a significant bottleneck, because we haven't got any capability at scale in order to deliver. So what is a bottleneck? Everybody, so from a theory perspective, understands. However, the key message in a bottleneck and key definition in the bottleneck actually creates delays in the workflow. And what are delays? Delays are waste, because you have got equipment not operating, equipment idle, or you have got people idle, etc. So that's a trigger point. And suddenly, if you look into bottlenecks, that's where you suddenly look into throughput. And once you have got throughput, then you can start saying, okay, we can increase output. At the same time, recognizing obviously the input challenge. So my old friend John Little, he created a Little's law in the early 1961. And he really looked into that from an output focused perspective. And what he kind of defined and found is actually everything is dependent on cycle times. So cycle times in construction means always kind of look into how long things take to assemble, how long things take to build. And if we kind of redefine Little's law, is kind of, we have to look into better material utilization. Because if we do more with the same input, which means we could do at the end of the process, we can deliver more output. And then we have to look into reducing the reduction of process time, and that leads to actually increased output. So that's kind of a bit of an interesting theoretical journey. At the same time, it's it's very tangible because it talks about one thing, which is waste. But just before kind of, you know, closing, it's important to understand as well, we are in the built environment, we're in a situation where actually costs are occurring. And the word affordability is out there big time. And even here in the local community, everybody talks about increased housing, affordability challenges, etc. But what are the key aspects of affordability? If we look in a typical apartment building here, cost breakdown, circa 15% is in the superstructure. 10% you bury in the ground. And these numbers vary always depending on the complexity and the size and scale of a project. But 20% are in the envelope, facade and roof, 25% predominantly in services. So if we look into this and say, you know, a timber superstructure will kind of change the affordability equation, I think we are on a wrong path here. We have to understand that more. And I broke it down in a very simplistic terms. I looked into currently a new build scenario, communities development, buy a piece of land, and there's an average figure from around $1,100. That's the kind of medium, the average between $750 and $1,500 per meter square. So suddenly that piece of land costs you $450,000. And very similar actually the build cost, and I was quite happy that actually both numbers had been lining up so nicely. So you build a 200 meter square house on this piece of land, and then suddenly you understand affordability is not only about actually the build cost. The land cost represents 50%, and this may go up and down depending on where you build. The closer to the city you come, the higher the land cost is, and obviously the higher the build cost will be as well. So if we look into this and say, actually, from a built environment perspective, we have got opportunities, but the opportunities are sitting actually in the land cost as well. And the New South Wales government is currently proposing a so-called land lease, not land lease, land lease initiative, which means they maintain ownership of the land and you lease the land to the future tenants, which kind of takes off cost pressure in terms of entering the market. At the same time, if we look at the build costs, we always have to understand actually build costs are predominantly about two aspects. There's a material cost portion and there's a labor cost portion. And if we break this further down, and I did the math in the background, I can show you more detail probably another time. But if we think actually we can achieve better affordability in terms of reducing prices to the market, we're probably the dent we're creating is very small. So for example, 10% cost saving on framing material will kind of, you know, roughly bump 0.2% of overall cost savings. So what makes a bigger dent? And the biggest dents from my perspective are actually in a few aspects. Kind of flagged waste as a kind of, you know, a critical element, and the way waste is kind of defined in lean technology, in lean methodology, is actually everything the customer is not willing to pay for. So having trades waiting for each other, customer is not willing to pay for. A lot of timber ending up in a skip, customer is not willing to pay for. So everything in that space is waste. And I've been seeing stats in the past where you can say, we don't change product, but change the process, and you can be 20 to 25% cheaper. So, and that's all kind of in that waste process. The other part we're struggling at the moment is what makes a building worth repeating. And this is more reference to the kind of, you know, design community as well. it looks like at the moment product does not meet market demand anymore. And even our friends in Scandinavia, Boklok, which is IKEA Skanska collaboration, they suddenly saw a drop of about 80% in their order book because the communities just have been sick of their product offering. It didn't meet market demands anymore. So that's always an important aspect. Doing the same thing over and over again doesn't automatically mean success. As Einstein was saying, it actually is, especially if you expect a different outcome, it's the definition of insanity. And the other challenge is certainly how do we get from currently more likely 18 months back to 12 months lead time, and how do we get to 21 weeks and then to 42 days? And there's a bit of logic behind the 21 weeks, because I was referring here with 21 weeks to a development of 21 buildings and 63 apartments in 1927 in Stuttgart, a place where I grew up. It's called the Weiss Siedlung. It has taken them 21 weeks to build. We are far away from that. And how even can we improve beyond that to 42 days, which is exactly the typical settlement period from you sell your house and you move into the next one. That would be an ideal scenario to actually create a complete different dynamic in the market. That was me, Eric, in a slightly different direction, but
it's very insightful, Carl. I think that's a good point about productivity, efficiency, and bit interesting. But the simple concept of little slow, I think that's addressed the bottlenecks at the moment, and you also addressed about the the completion time here and cost breakdown. I think that's very insightful. That's also address what the question the previous webinar about better buy than build. But I think people know that you have this key question, what makes a building worth repeating. I think that's because it didn't meet the demand anymore. So I think that we can elaborate that one. For the audience, I invite, if you have any question, you can type in the Q&A box. Please feel free. There's already 2 questions there, but I expect more. Right. For the third speaker, I have Craig K. Craig has worked more than 30 years, I think nearly 30 years in the tilling timber. Is very well regarded in the industry, I believe, and our members personally approach him for advice on timber issue. Craig's primarily covered the Australian Standard and National Construction Code compliance, and he's a registered building practitioner and hold civil engineering background in civil engineering from Monash, and also postgrad in municipal engineering from Deakin University. Craig, please present your presentation.
Thank you very much, everyone. I'll just start sharing my screen. Just make sure this works properly. And can you all see that?
Yep.
Okay, once again, thank you. Welcome, everyone. I'm taking a slightly different tack than Nathan. Nathan's from the local softwood producers. So I'm representing the EWP, Engineered Wood Product Manufacturers. And so what am I talking about when I talk about EWP? Well, I'm usually talking about timber I-joists. I'm usually talking about LVL, laminated veneered lumber, and in various grades and sizes. I'm also talking about glue laminated timber, GLT, in various grades and sizes. So you can see in all those images that it is essentially reconstituted. It's timber being pulled apart and put back together in its most efficient form. And so the other thing I'm looking at is cassettes. Now, cassette's a fancy word for a group of joists or a group of elements put together. You can be I-joists, you can be tech beam, you can be hybrid. In this case, we've got an LVL composite, which is a competitor, I guess, to CLT. So when you see the word EWP, that's what I'm roughly talking about. Now, I would argue that EWP is a response to what Karl was saying, is to change the material type or to change the end use a little bit, but still use the same wood fibre. So we've still got a wood product, but we're modifying it to make its end use, or to make it more efficient, I guess. Taking up Karl's point, more efficient use of the product. So EWP in Australia, well, whether we like it or not, the market demand, there's only 30% of the LVL that's used in the country available here. Imports make 70%. So I make no apology for that, and we'll talk about that in a minute. So why? Well, a competitive LVL plant needs to have an output of about 80 to 100,000 cubic metres a year. So assuming 40% recovery of the log, if we're going to peel it, we need about 175 to 220,000 cubic metres of high-grade log fibre per year to run one LVL plant. Our softwood plantation area Australia has been basically static. In fact, it's declining slightly. LVL raw material, if we took that much out and made lots of LVL plants, there'd be very little wood fibre available for structural framing. And a world-class plant in New Zealand stopped manufacturing for Australia, despite having all those other attributes in place, because they couldn't get the grades to match what the market demanded. So let's talk about imports. Well, we're certainly in a global village. The term imports, unfortunately, is often weaponised by vested interests to imply inferior or some sort of deception. So it's, if you want to disparage something, call it imported. But I think really we have very short memories. Where is anyone in this forum? Is anyone's car made here? Are we saying that imported cars are faulty or defective? Where's your phone made? Where's your computer made? Where do most medicines come from? Most raw materials come from India or China. So the fact that it's imported does not present a problem. So let's look a little bit of a history of this. Let's look in 2020. The first significant market disruption was Carter-Holt-Harvey removing high beam and high span from the Australian market. That was the first disruption. And to all those people who think it still exists, I'm sorry to tell you it doesn't. So that took approximately 30 to 50,000 cubic metres of LVL out of the market in that year from going forward. So that was, I guess, the start of some of the LVL shortages. Move on to 2021, we talked about COVID pandemic, and it introduced lots of things. One, for importers, it introduced a shipping nightmare. The cost of one 40-foot container from Europe for our company alone went up 10 times. So what used to be $1,400 a container went to $14,000 a container over that time. So you had these massive price hikes, not because of the material was costing more, but shipping. And shipping could make typically more money from travelling to China to Europe, so they cut the amount of ships coming here. Again, as Karl said, some of these things we could talk for hours about, but I'll just flick over them. And it's fairly unique. The next thing is most Western governments added a building stimulus package all at the same time. So it's normal in the import and EWP business that one country will be doing well, or one part of the world will be doing well, and one part doing not so well. We talked about those cycles. Nathan talked about boom and bust cycles. But it was unusual in this particular case that all the governments at the same time decided to have a stimulus package. Understand why, but it led to that massive spike in cost and availability. So move on to 2022, we had the COVID lockdowns and, of course, easing, and Russia invades Ukraine. Well, in 2021, 40% of the LVL used in Australia came from Russia. So that suddenly stopped. It became conflict timber. PEFC, FSC withdrew their certifications from it, and the Australian government introduced a 35% tariff on it. So obviously it became uneconomical to do it, and most of the big box stores, the Bunnings, the Mitre 10s, suddenly closed their door to any timber coming from Russia. So move on to 2022. Well, obviously the EWP supply has stabilised. And to quote Nathan's words before, we've gone from undersupply to oversupply. However, there's a couple of lasting points there. The number of people claiming to be LVL suppliers has probably doubled in that time, from pre-COVID to post-COVID. Now, some of them are disappearing again now because they have no backbone, they have no resource, they have no support, and well, they're affectionately known in the trade as pocketbook traders. But they're now dumping LVL at low rates, so that's causing problems for the reputable, responsible dealers. So let's just have a look at where the LVL is coming from. In the year ending December last year, 2023, China was supplying 51,000. If we look at the numbers, you'll see it falling away. So you can see that at December 2023, 47.1%, or nearly 50% of the LVL being supplied to the market here is coming from China. So let's look how someone like us, I would regard ourselves as a responsible importer and also manufacturer. So let's look, I'll just give you a little brief insight of how we tackle this. So we identify a product need. We partner with private label manufacturers to develop the product, and we market it under our brand. So there's no hiding behind this, oh, this comes from this one, this comes from that one. As a company, as a responsible company, we take full responsibility for all the structural characteristics, the NCC compliance, and any product issues. So even though your LVL you might buy from us might come from 4 different manufacturers, it doesn't matter. If it's got smart frame on it, we take responsibility. We provide in-house preparation for all our NCC compliance documents. We work with engineers, architects, builders, and owners to develop a solution for our product. Now, that could be a big developer. That could be Lend-Lease. Well, not so much Lend-Lease, but it could be multiplex, or it is often multiplex. Those sort of customers. We are a wholesaler, so we do supply discrete orders to a merchant, so a Bunnings, a Bowens, or whatever you have in your state. And we supply technical support to any part of the supply chain. So I would argue that that's what any responsible supplier of engineered wood products should be doing with their product. So obviously, as a responsible supplier, we have warranties, we have product certification. I'll flick through those. If anyone wants them, they just have to ask. And this is a new one that Andrew helped me do some years ago. It's a requirement not a requirement, it's a means of providing evidence of suitability in the National Construction Code to have a product technical statement. So if any of you are concerned, you want to know how the product meets all the requirements, meets all the, for things that are not codified. Now, there are some things that we use that there is actually no Australian standard for, and that's example is I-joists. I'll use OSBs, another one, just a couple. So the product technical statement takes all the performance requirements required in the NCC and shows how they are met by testing and other methods. So it's a very valuable part. And again, you will only find this sort of documentation from responsible EWP suppliers. So let's talk a bit about LVL. LVL to be used in a structural application must meet the NCC performance requirements, the same as the pine that Nathan does from AKD, nothing different. To meet the deemed to satisfy requirements, the LVL must be manufactured to that standard, ASN Z4357. Just so that you know, there are no codified standard LVL grades in Australia. Even though people talk about whatever, there is no codified standard grades. Nathan can tell F5, MGP10, MGP12. Everyone knows what there is. There is no codified LVL grades in Australia. So each manufacturer is producing a proprietary product, and the reputable manufacturers will be accompanied with comprehensive span tables and literature. So it's common to see LVL just called a stiffness, E12, E13, E15 stamped on the LVL. Unfortunately, that doesn't fully identify the LVL's characteristic strengths and stiffnesses. This ignores many other values that are necessary. And here's part of the standard. And the part of the standard says if you're doing LVL, you need to provide all those values. So don't just call it E value and E stiffness. That's just not enough. So again, this is mandatory as part of the LVL standard, and I'm also combining the timber preservation standard on here as well. So a responsible manufacturer of LVL will have all these markings. So this is a brand identifier, in our case, Smart. This is a grade. So this is actually the stiffness. Most people do the stiffness. We have had to deal with one person whose that number was his item number. And so it was very confusing. We had to suggest to that guy, in the interest of the industry, that he didn't do that. A reputable manufacturer will also have their third-party accreditation. This little E0 here is a formaldehyde emission class, so it is glued together. It is a glued product. So any architect usually, or anything near a government department, will want to know what the the formaldehyde emission class is. The next piece of information on a piece of LVL is if it's been preservative treated, we'll have this series of numbers and letters. So the first set of three numbers, is a preservation plant number. So that tells you where it's been treated. The chemical number is what chemical has been used in the glue line in this case. You can see a G at the end. And again, if you want to know what's that right, you can look up that in Appendix E of 1604 Part 1. Again, during the height of COVID, we had a retailer, who we didn't have enough material for them. And they'd ring me up and say, Craig, can I use this? Is this okay to use? And we came across all sorts of things. We had chemical numbers on there that meant nothing, and they weren't even approved in Australia, yet people were claiming H2S compliance. So if you want to know anything about more, you look at that chemical number. Hazard class is where it should be used. Now, part of being a responsible supplier is to tell the customer where it should be used and where it shouldn't be used. And so if you see H2S on there, and that means inside, above ground, kept dry, and it's sitting on a deck somewhere, getting wet all the time, and someone didn't bother doing it, then that's a misuse of the product. However, usually the product cops a beating because the product failed. And the last in this little list on the side of a piece of LVL is this letter here is telling you how it's treated. So this is a glue line. If it's envelope treated with only 5 mil on the outside, it'll have an E. If it's glue line face, it'll be GF. So there's a lot of information on there. I don't encourage anyone who wants to use engineered product to make sure they understand that. So again, responsible product manufacturers have a full suite of design guides. This tells you the do's and the don'ts. There's almost as much information in there about what you can't do with the product and where you shouldn't use the product and where you should. This is all backed up, of course. The industry does a lot of testing, and this was a 120, 120, 120 FRL test that was done some years ago to show that engineered wood products, lightweight engineered wood products, protected from fire, can give you that level of preservation. Now, just as new, I don't know where people on this webinar are from. In Queensland, you have the building construction legislation, and new in New South Wales, you have the Building Legislation Amendment 2023. These are essentially the same. Look at the required information for a building product. For each intended use, states or otherwise communicates the following: the suitability of the product for intended use, instructions about how the product must be associated with the building, instructions how the product must be used to conform it is not a non-conforming product, and it also makes each person in the supply chain responsible for the quality of the product. So that is quite powerful legislation. It hasn't been used terribly much in Queensland yet. It's sometimes used for the external, but just be aware that when you're sourcing any product for your timber, that you make sure that you are getting it from a responsible one. Now, Andrew's going to talk about, I won't steal his thunder on this, he's going to talk about some of the prefab and all those buzzwords, words that Carl was talking about. I just want to run through this little project we did, quite big project, many years ago now. This was medium density residential apartments, 1 level concrete, 4 levels timber framed, 900 square metres per level residential, 283 floor cassettes, which we manufactured in Melbourne, prefabricated timber wall framing for 4 levels above the ground. I think, I could be wrong, someone may correct me here. I think that was the first in Australia with prefabricated timber wall framing for such a height. 4 levels constructed in 6 weeks, Carl. That was the beauty of that. And it was more effective. The same company built a concrete one beside it, and it came in at 25% cheaper. Again, it wasn't the materials that were cheaper per se, it was the build time, the services time, the hiring of equipment, etc., etc. But what did we learn? What did we learn out of this? What has the industry learned? Okay, in a timber frame wall, those studs, those poor guys down the bottom, are carrying much more load than the ones above them. And so when you look at stud material or column material, you can see that as soon as you move into an LVL space, you've 2.3 times the axial capacity of those studs. So LVL, we're talking about material fit for purpose. LVL is making big inroads into the stud market where you have heavy loads or very tall studs, making big inroads in that space, and it's extending the use of lightweight frame walls into all sorts of applications. So let's look at that. If we just used the same material at the bottom, we would have had a much bigger section. We would have reduced the usable habitable space. However, by going to a high strength LVL in that space, we're able to go back to the normal 90 mil, and therefore the habitable space of those lower units is the same as the ones above. And so you have a hierarchy of material types from high strength LVLs up to your conventional pines as you get towards the top. So that's me. I'll leave the questions till later.
Right. Thanks, Craig. Very detailed and powerful. It's a bit of context for the audience. I think one of the knowledge we want to have for this webinar too is about the engineering wood products. And as Craig said about the international threats, that's a must. And every time we talk about international threat, it's about comparative advantage. I think that's Craig's presentation highlights that we have from the timber industry. We have that comparative advantage for cheaper, faster, reliable building, especially with the low mid-rise building, because that's part, one of the invention that we offer from our industry for this issue in housing. Right. Well, next speaker Andrew Dunn. Andrew is represented the industry, and he's in the numerous committees from Australia Standard, Building Industry and Government. He has extensive knowledge in fire and sound timber technology and has been more recently involved in the introduction of cross-laminated timber and mid-rise timber building system. Andrew has a civil structure engineering degree from the University of Sydney and Master of Timber Engineering for Central Queensland University. He has 33 years experience in the building industry, with 27 years with timber sector, and currently he is the CEO of Timber Development Association. Andrew, please.
Thank you. There's my slide sharing. Eric, can you see the slides? Please confirm.
Yes. Yep.
Okay. Thank you, Eric, and thank you, and thank you, my previous speakers. Yeah, obviously being the last person on this, I've seen this part of my talk being decimated, but that's what happens. So what I'll do, I'll concentrate what's left, and I'm going to focus on beyond the material slide. And I'm actually going to talk about, as Craig alluded to, as a prefabrication. But I thought, we are talking about the supply chain, not just the fundamental product formation in the first place. So my talk's going to be about prefabrication in the essence. And I was asked by Eric to address a couple of questions. I'll include that in my talk, and I'll have some concluding thoughts, because we saw Karl-Heinz doing that, and Craig also, and Nathan doing that. So I have my own thoughts. So this presentation is based on single-family housing and townhouses. I'm not venturing into the commercial building world because it would take up its own webinar by itself. So I'm just going to concentrate on that. So just remember that in the background of your mind. I'm not talking about commercial buildings. This is all about houses. And what I've noticed, and the discussion has been a little bit focused on, is prefabrication our saviour? You look at the press recently, and you see the ministers out there are saying, explore new ways to boost housing as quick. Modular housing will be the vital tool to achieve this, and housing built within days instead of every year, and build more quality homes quicker. Prefab modular housing gives us a chance to do that. All this noise out there, and so we get into this thing this is our saviour is prefab. So from you can see that there needs to be some urgency to make everything prefab. But I just can't quite understand it. Prefab is nothing new. It's been around for ages. For example, the Romans, when they plundered across England, built their own forts by prefabs, and panelising homes was shipped across to the British colonies in the 1600s, and in flat pack police cottages to the goldfields from around the world, and also the Eiffel Tower itself, the most famous temporary structure ever, and us in the prefabricated home post-war, and our most biggest prefab building is the Sydney Opera House. So it's been around for a while. There's nothing new in this prefab space. And just to give an example, the couple of examples of the oldest prefab homes I could find is an 1843 London manufactured home, which is in sunny Victoria, and likewise in Sydney we have an 1855 German chalet built there. Both of these buildings are still around, and just showing the longevity of timber itself can be both of non-durable timbers. So prefab is nothing new, and but we seem to be the answer to all the government's problems at the moment. But if we look a bit further and we see RMIT, and they said, what's the drivers for prefab? And in Australia, in Australia context, including high labour costs and skilled labour shortage, and I think previous speakers have mentioned that. So we just looked through our previous lists of prefab, and we find that we can tick the box on all of these ones where those high labour costs and skilled labour shortages is driven these buildings. But so it's been there for 1,000 years, but seems to be no mention of time. And that's one of the other aspects I see as a driver for prefab is time, or the speed of construction, or the saving of time, which our previous speakers did mention. So we'll explore it a little bit later. So what is a prefabrication to the timber industry? What is it? Well, it's frame and truss. The frame and truss sector has been around for a long time, and more recently we've added to the portfolio of frame and truss businesses with floor cassettes and that's supposed to be a roof cassettes, and then stair cassettes as well. So we are adding to our portfolio of products which can be off-site manufactured to speed up the on-site construction. The frame and truss has been around for a while, and it's been first really came in the early 60s, so it's been 60 odd years plus. And one of the interesting things that I noticed is we stored multiple booms and bust housing cycles. We saw Nathan talk about these boom and bust cycles. The frame and truss sector has really stood up to that. So it's interesting to understand a little bit about that, because some of our prefabbed panelising businesses and things like that have fallen by the wayside as I go through the boom and bust cycles. So it's interesting to understand a bit more about that. Well, obviously, our panelising systems, great new contenders in a sense of what's happening, but as I said before, they do suffer from a little bit of boom and bust coming and going. I do think the open panelised system is something. One of the things my soapbox would say, if we can get the external wall of the building enclosed as the earliest point in time, would help our timber frames, because a lot of the issues that we have is really around moisture. So an open well, semi-open panel would be desirable there. We also have volumetric, and volumetric is been around for a while, and it's available right now. It tends to just change where the building occurring from the on-site to in a shed. So it's a viable proposition, but it needs a driver for all this before it to be cost effective. And of course, we have mass timber, probably the ultimate in offsite prefab construction. It's around now for about the last 12 years, and it's in the housing market. So we do have a multiple set of methods to deliver prefabricated timber options to the housing market, and it's quite blessed to be the choice and availability in Australia. But what is prefab? Well, prefab is really timber construction. I'm really struggling to find, when I look at buildings, how much of it is not prefab. It's almost like all of the construction we do is offsite manufactured and delivered to the site. It's just part of the turf these days. We don't seem to do anything else with the timber other than that. Very rarely is it stick built on site. Yes, there's a couple of areas, maybe a cut-in roof in Western Australia or alteration additions where it's just not cost effective to get a frame and truss supplied. There may be the area. So I saw that with my own conference, a timber offsite conference. We've now deleted the word offsite out, and it's gone to timber construct, because basically all timber is offsite manufactured. So why make a point of it? So I think that what I'm trying to get to this whole point is that we're getting these people from the government calling out for prefab, but hang on, that's what the timber industry is all about, and when it comes to building construction. So aren't we already there? And just as a reminder and a blatant plug, our conference for timber constructors on the 12th and 13th of August in Ridges, Melbourne. So I look forward to seeing you there. So what else is needed? And we kind of like the industry can't be sitting on the hand, because what we've seen, as soon as we do that, competitors come in and copy us. So we know that with the steel industry, they've just basically got a product which is pretty much the same. So we've got to be careful they won't just sit on their hands. What we need to do, we need to evolve. And we're seeing that, and we've seen that with the cassettes in the floor, roof, and stair cassettes, and also with the EWPs. They're evolving with the house needs. But what can an association do? I'm representing a timber association. What we can do is make it easier for timber framings to be used, or timber products to be used. And how we're looking at doing that is increasing productivity in manufacturing and on site. Expanding the range of prescriptive solutions for houses of all building types, not just limited to houses. So anything which is a house type building should be prescriptively adopted or allowed to be built within regulations. Expand the size of the buildings. Our prescriptive standards don't match what we currently build. We need to change those. I'll go into a little bit more later. And the inclusion of EWPs. EWPs are loosely referenced within our codes, but they are predominantly a key driver of use in our construction these days. So we need to get ahead and update our codes and standards and to deliver all the above. And we're doing that because we're calling it the future framing collaborative. And at the moment we're currently asking for it to be funded through the new Australian Forest and Wood Innovation Research Centres, which, if you're not aware of it, it's a federal government research program which has access to $101.5 million. I'm not quite sure why the strange number, but it's quite a large lot of money, and it's made up of 3 universities. So we've asked the industry's sat around for the last collectively looked at for the last 2 years about what it needs when knowing this Athwey Centre was going to be developed, and we put together a program of how to rationalise and revitalise the timber framing to meet the current needs. So that's currently in front of them. So we encourage people to support that project, because we do see it as a generational opportunity to modernise timber framing. And moving on, Eric did ask me to address a couple of questions, and the first question was, from the association perspective, do you think we can innovate in product use in residential building? Yeah, always. We're doing it always. We just gave you examples how we innovated right throughout, and the product range and abilities to provide a off-site manufactured thing is quite large. But just as an example, I also went to the Sydney build, didn't see Karl-Heinz wandering around, but I did notice 2 new timber-based products within the displays, and another one from a recent trip. So the product which I saw in the Sydney build last week was EcoKit. Yeah, I know about this type of product and known about this for about 15 years, but I was surprised to see it now available in the Australian market. So this is something that the plywood manufacturers would love to death, because it's just mainly made out of plywood, and they're building homes out of it. And to date, this particular provider has built 3 homes. Yep, they all look the same, but if you like that shape, and it's not a bad shape, I think it's a bow 40, so it's quite a good shape for bushfires. It's quite a useful way. So it's out there and about there in the marketplace, but it's a new way of building houses. And another new product, Tecto Carbo, which I bumped in this one. I went, wow. I've known about this type of product around, and I'm just wondering why it's never ever come to Australia. Now it is. There's a manufacturing plant north of Sydney, and this stuff is made out of 72% recycled wood chip. I'm just looking at this and going, yeah, it looks a bit over design. Maybe there's some refinements in this product, but the circular economy, doesn't it solve the circular economy needs? And just putting all our recycled wood chip into something like that will solve that problem. It amazes me to see these things, which I wasn't aware of it until I went to the Sydney build. And the other new product which I personally got an interest in is this post and plate building system. So I was recently lucky to be in North America and visited this building, which is a 19-story building, 17 of timber, and it basically uses columns and a flat plate floor made out of MPP. That's mass panel plywood, a new product which is like CLT but made out of a veneer product. I always say if the American invented CLT, would it probably be a veneer based, not a sawn timber based product. So it's interesting. This one is very quick and cost effective. The developers reckons they make about 20 to 30% savings on the superstructure costs. So it's quite a unique way of doing it, and I look forward for it to be transferred into the Australian context. But we are doing a number of things. And on to the second question, in general business of timber product, what is the current conditions in response to high demands for housing? Well, Nathan's really covered this, but I thought I'd just summarise it in the movie Caddyshack. Well, we're waiting, and not if you're looking for a sign for commencements of building those extra houses, this is a sign for it, because we're finding that with the building permits, and we saw this is for the last 10 years. So from prior to COVID, it was fairly consistent, but we've had this up and down, and since COVID's finished. And if we look at the new house sales from HIA, you'll find that it's decreasing, and more worrisome is the forecast by the HIA, which we see going forward that there's a decline in the number of sales, which is a bit of a yikes moment, really. So I think Nathan probably undersold his position. I think we're in for a bit of a rough time. So there's plenty of opportunity for timber, and it's not likely, in my look at it, until mid 25 before we see before we get a bit challenging conditions. So I think that anybody who's thinking about building this, we've got a solution for you. And it's kind of like I was thinking about it. I was looking at it and I was going, why have we got this problem? Is it because we don't build as many houses or dwellings in comparison to other countries around the world? So I did a bit of investigation and just listed up dwelling starts per 1,000 population, and it was interesting to see that in Australia about six dwellings per 1,000 population wasn't too bad. We're not quite as good as New Zealanders or the French, which is best in Europe, but damn better than UK and Canada and US, which was actually a surprise. So any guess who is the best at has the highest level of dwellings per capita? It's probably no rocket science there, and that's China. And so eight dwellings per 1,000 capita. So that's last year's numbers. With the year before, you'll find it was even higher. So it's a little bit collapse in the residential market in China. But I thought this is a little bit unfair because it waited, because I did think that the sizes of the dwellings in China and UK are much smaller than the dwelling sizes in Australia and New Zealand. And so I added to the average dwelling size. And Australia, according to the website that I went to, had the highest per square metre per house in the world. The 214 per square meter. And when you multiply the dwelling start by the size of the dwelling, then the amount of per square meter per 1,000 population, we're up there in second. Just a long way behind New Zealanders. They must like their big houses in New Zealand. So I was just thinking, we know that the government's asking for 1.2 million houses, and at the best we can probably produce is half of what normally what the government numbers are doing it. One way to delivering that maybe is to halve the size of our houses, and we can do that with the current supply chain. And so you look at it, the houses in Australia are almost 3 times the size of what the average dwelling size in the UK. So that could one way to solve the problem without any change to the supply chain. But that's really simple, oversimplifying the thing. We're very much a custom focused on building, and that leads me on to my final bit of area. Is to and just to summarize this first before we get on to that one, is there's plenty of capacity and options going forward. So anybody who's thinking about building something in the residential market, come and have a chat to the timber industry. We'll be able to help you there. And it looks like this will go on to well into the 25 before we see housing demand change. So my concluding thoughts is really based on some words from Tim Reardon, from the chief economist from HIA. Tim has argued different market factors are driving offsite popularity in Europe and the US. And what happens in the United States, for example, is almost 100% of the homes are built and sold. And if we wanted to move prefabrication forward, then we need to really change this, change the acceptance of it into a more or less customization of housing. We saw that we had a previous speaker to talk about one of the big lock deficiencies where they were building too the same. But if we're probably the opposite. We're probably too bespoke in our houses, and to bring in more productivity into the thing, we need to be more standardization. But it also is a driving factor is speed in this thing. So when we find that when there's a different way of sales to market, we get a different speed becomes more critical and more of a driver for prefab. And when we think about that, current single home family is owner financed. So it's not a developer or anything. It's the actual owner of the building is financing of that, and time is a different matter. Speed is not a factor, as the financial savings are not achieved with increased speed. So the builder takes a year to build. Well, it's not going to mean anything to the end product. Banks are not going to pay until the work is complete. So there really isn't any driver for speed in Australia. Housing construction, maybe the occupier wants it, but really it's in the hands of the builder. So, and it's a complete opposite situation in commercial construction, where the developer accumulates costs in the time dependent, because they're holding all those costs while they wait for the construction to be built. So I think that's an important thing to understand about prefab, is that the way we customize housing doesn't actually attune itself to the delivery of prefab in the ultimate form that we're seeing in Europe and particularly in Scandinavia. And maybe the single family housing, we already have the right prefabrication model, being the frame and truss. I think we undervalue how we deliver the frame and truss is actually probably the right solution for our market in Australia with the customised housing. And we just need to make it more efficient to get ahead of the copycats out there, is where I see it all. And at that point, I'd like to say thank you.
Thanks, Andrew. That's very, very insightful. But I think that the question I give it to you, but we innovate from the industry, and it's tooling again from the previous webinar. But I think that from at least Alan about the long historical data, but preference people to living with themselves, and it's just not about housing. So we need to spread that the residential, not just house, but also all building types. Right. We go for the panel discussion and question and answer. I think I have already 3 in the question and answer. For the audience, feel free, if you have a question specific to whom, then what's your question in the question and answer box. First, I'd like to share with, I think this is a question for Nathan. This is coming from our colleague in Canberra, Stephanie Black. Very insightful. Do you see any solid opportunity for timber industry to leverage on the net zero transition? Especially example like biomass-based energy production. Very specific about that. Nathan, any thoughts about this?
It's probably not my field of expertise, but around carbon and net zero, AKD has a number of plantations, and we're talking, you know, with partners at the moment about how we can work together to expand those plantations, you know, whilst taking advantage of the carbon side of that. So not really probably directly addressing that, but it is something, you know, we're more than just a sawmill. The forestry element is an important part of what we do as well.
Probably Craig, you like to have a comments about this because you're also in the production industry, but the net zero transition.
I'm probably not the best. Andrew's probably the best to work on this, so I'll pass over to him.
Yeah, Andrew.
Oh, geez, I think I'm getting. Okay, I always think that we're better than net zero. So the yeah, we lock up carbon in our buildings. So the just in transitioning to net zero, we've gone beyond that. So the but yeah, obviously we do. It's the only problem which lets down the side is like when we're looking at housing is that there's not enough wood used in houses. Yeah, we have, we use concrete slabs and concrete roof tiles and bricks. Yeah, we need to convert those products to more timber-based, and then we'll have much better outcomes, which are carbon positive for the thing. So I'm saying, my solution there is that for that transition to be more beneficial, is that we actually got to increase the number of timber products being used in the building, and get rid of some of those pollutant products, which are very pollutant. A lot of the stuff you'll find that the life cycle analysis is disguises the benefit of timber because there's too much of those heavy mass products being used.
Yeah, Carl, with your experience with so many projects, do you think also this, any view about the net zero transition, the timber industry?
I think timber plays a vital role in that, and going back a few years and having been involved in a large builder and developer in Australia. And if we look into the journey of some bigger players, timber is the only pathway to get to a net zero position, or at least having a horizon like going to absolute zero. There's definitely no way around timber if you're on that pathway. So it plays an important role. I think the other part, which is kind of an addition to obviously the stored and embodied carbon in the structure, is actually the overall performance. And I'm specifically look here at thermal performance, because we underestimate obviously the impact on operational cost and therefore operational carbon, and specifically in residential buildings. So timber provides already a good starting point for a better performing envelope in comparison to other building materials.
Right. We have also any comment from the audience about the bottlenecks. Well, we realized that FWPA will provide the data dashboard about the ABS building activity. So wait for the publication there. But this is, I think, something we can discuss for the panel here about the bottlenecks. It's some burdensome standard about the stamp duties, taxes, levies, and surcharge. I think first I'd like to go to you first, Carl, but because you elaborate about waste and productivity. Any comment about this bottleneck, especially with the last 2 years? We see that, approval a bit higher, but completion we get from 6 months, 9 months, then probably RBI, I think that's in the bulletin right now, said that completion is a bit getting worse, 12 months. Any comments about this?
Yeah, obviously I've been looking at this topic a little bit closer over the last few years, and have been engaging with some of the players in the market. And there's a real challenge, and a challenge nothing to do with product, or call it product availability to a certain extent. It's to do with the internal processes. What kind of forward planning have got house builders?
Yeah.
So forward planning means you look into a longer horizon and look into your order book, and you make sure you have got all the materials available. So it's we still see even in bigger developments, procurement sits within the project teams, and the project teams procure on a project by project base instead of looking what's our statewide or countrywide order book looking like, and then suddenly you work directly with the supplier and the manufacturer. That gives actually both the supplier and manufacturer a much better position, as well as the builder themselves a much better position with access to material. But that's still a cultural challenge.
Yeah. I'd like to have a comment from Nathan, from your perspective in the industry. You know, we if you see the data, the current data from even in the FWPA website, a bit you know, starts to decline, but the softwood sales volumes, and we have these bottlenecks in the construction industry. Do you see any that, you know, association with that, with the current industry? You talk about the sustainable growth. I know the business, in the perspective of business, we like certainty, we had a consistency, we like the stable. What do you view about these bottlenecks impacting the business condition right now?
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. Look, I think Carl put it really well. That forward planning, having better visibility of that pipeline, what it's made up of, what's required, you know, would support the entire channel in terms of delivering what we need to deliver, and the planning and investment and training and everything that goes in behind that. Yeah, are the bottlenecks a concern? They absolutely are. You know, I sort of touched on too earlier in my presentation around labour, around skilled labour, and then around capital investment. But it's, you know, it's an ongoing challenge. It'll never disappear. It's something we need to continue to look at. You're just moving one bottleneck to the next once you solve one. Yeah.
I'll come back to later about the inventory.
Sorry, Eric, that's the nature of bottlenecks. They tend to move, right? So you always have to be on the watch out, and very similar to labor. What I've observed is again, forward planning is a real skill set, and I think that's probably the most crucial skill set missing. It's even with aligning trades on your project, plan with them, and kind of move away from the ad hoc. Oh, kind of, I need an electrician tomorrow, and then being surprised not getting one, and then suddenly that puts a whole side. Grounds a whole site. Yeah? So it's kind of these planning capabilities and foresight. That's probably one of the biggest obstacles.
Right. Craig, do you have any comment on this before we move to your question, specifically question about the bottleneck? Any comment?
I would argue that one of the bottlenecks is the NIMBY principle. We need to build more homes, but no one wants something next to them. If they get something in their suburb, they all think they've got a right to object. And the building industry, everyone can jump up and down and say, oh, we can do this faster or quicker, but the not in my backyard principle is alive and well. And you just got to see now, it just goes on and on and on. And so if we're going to achieve any sort of density or increased density in our cities, we're going to see that there has to be a major change in the way we see our cities and the way we want them to look. And if we're all going to sit on our 600 to 1,000 square metre block and not want anyone around, then we're going to be in the same problem 10 years' time.
Yeah. Andrew, quick comment?
I think my colleagues have pretty much nailed it all, but what the question is asking, taxes mainly. Yes, they're always a bottleneck, aren't they, or a hurdle to the. We seem to pay a lot of taxes in our construction So maybe government cuts back on that a little bit and might get some more productivity occurring. So, and being a bit facetious there, but yeah, look, and Karl-Heinz and myself are both from Sydney. We've seen a recent thing with the Roseville interchange. When you have new infrastructure, it gets rid of one problem but creates another problem. So you got to make sure that you don't solve one problem and create another problem. Is a key thing there. So good question.
Yeah, I agree. In the perspective of the economists as well, we already put some notes like years ago, but this stamp duty is the most ineffective tax for people entering the property market. But everything's offered to the as a solutions, or is that that's the major revenue from the state for the state government. Right. The next question here for you, Craig, about your graph, the LVL imports in 2023. What's the number present? If that's the meter cubic, this seems way too small. It's just about the validity. Do you have any comment on this?
Well, if it's wrong, I can blame you because it comes from your website, Eric. So if it's wrong, I can blame you. So no, that is in cubic meters, and that figure would include a lot of supply issues with ships. For a while there after COVID, ships wouldn't come. They'd take 6, 12 weeks, 18 weeks to get here. And so that figure is probably is correct, but it reflects a particular point in time. I think the graph, though, was to show that where the wood is coming from, and there's a new source and a very good source of that wood too. So yes, it probably is low for all those reasons I explained.
Yeah. Craig, I'll probably jump in there and help you a little bit. The numbers you're reporting were structural LVL, okay?
Yep.
There are other, when you look at the import numbers, there's about 6 different categories LVLs reported under. So there's tropical LVL, and there's conifer LVLs and non-conifer LVLs and structural LVLs. So you just reported the structural number, which is for all intentional purposes is good enough. We must also remember a lot of LVL comes in this country for formwork. Yep. And that's probably what's missing out on the list from the person's probably spotted is 1/3 of the market is probably related to the formwork.
Yep.
Which wouldn't be reported under the category.
Yeah, I think in terms for Alex there asking this question, FWPA, if we in the building of the data export, part of that is to provide you with the trade activities data. It's for the export import based on the product level and also based on the country's destination and original. So wait for that. It's the official data. So we have this program with the best, and that data update regularly, and we provide that to our members in the new data dashboard. So that will be like a transparent. It's not just only the 4-digit of chapter 44. As you know, in here, I believe many of the audience is industry. There will be like the 8 digits of products. So that we'll inform everyone, and feel free if there's any queries or question, you can send an email to, you can find in the website. Right. I think I have also one. I think I opened the discussion with the panel here. One of the concern is from the previous webinar is the idea, but right, if the timber industry have these opportunities and challenges, the opportunities pretty much is about we can contribute to the low mid building, and that's because everything's in the supply. That's the question. The question now is we have major problem here in the supply, and addressing about the skilled labor is not just like overnight. That will be take a process, but a quick short-term address is to building in the low and mid-rise building, residential building. And one of the key takeaway from the previous is we need to build out within the not just around the capital city, but also something that around the regional areas. I'd like to have a view from our panel here. If you have any like idea how that's possible, because currently we have that one. We can supply from innovative perspective, innovation perspective with the engineering wood products. But what's your view if we want to propose this? And yeah, we're part of the solution. This is in particular specific that we can address in the short term. And if you, I think that I can start from Nathan, if you have any view with that in base of your industry.
So Eric, if I get that right, the medium density in regional areas, is
Right.
that?
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, absolutely. It's just a natural expansion. I'm supportive of that view. I don't see. I think there's, in terms of the supply chain, we service. You know, there is a model set up at the moment to get timber there. It's a different structure, but we do service regional areas currently. So yeah, I feel comfortable with that.
Carl, any view? Especially with the
Yeah, there's certainly a few more questions we need to answer. Yeah? So Craig has nicely shown, I think it was called, or it's called the green, as a kind of project with 4 and 5 floors. I think it's actually a great example. The question is why kind of has, back then it was kind of Frasers, and then later Australand, why haven't they kind of embraced that further? And similar to kind of mass timber apartment building, there will be, or there are 1 or 2 out there, but hasn't been embraced further. So what are the real obstacles here? Because I think there's a big opportunity for the industry because of travel around Greater Sydney, and you drive through the suburbs and see apartment buildings going up 3 floors, 4 floors. None of them is timber. None of them has got any timber components in there as a structure. So where is this coming from, and what are the obstacles? And that's where I've got some hypotheses, but no answer. So kind of unpacking that is certainly an important exercise we have to do as an industry.
In your perspective, Carl, because we need also to have an argument about cost effective. Do you think that with the mass timber here, especially with the low mid building residential, you think that will provide us with more cost effective, competitive compared with the other material?
I have been referring a lot in the past but to the circa 150 projects I've been involved in the UK, and I was tend to answer that question with saying none of these projects would have been ever built if we couldn't have shown kind of some advantage, cost or program or both. So that's a starting point, and obviously in this country, in other parts of the world, timber then suddenly has been sold as something which comes at a premium. We may have to reconsider our position and again look into where is this coming from, and where have we contributed to that perception, and who is the audience we have to address to change that. And I know the contractual environment is kind of complex, even to a point what I said before around the bottlenecks. Procurement is on a project by project base, and procurement is still very ad hoc, and there's no long-term planning. If we look now into imported, and this is as a kind of not a negative attribute, imported wood products, they have got a long lead time, and they need a different level of upfront coordination. If you do ad hoc procurement, you're not having the right response. The same with the pricing. There's a lot of pricing based on timber pricing based on hearsay. So once the message is out, timber structures cost 30% more expensive, every cost planner will hear about it. and suddenly the attitude towards a timber-based structure from a cost planning perspective is going to be more expensive. The same time, we see very often a comparison between a traditional approach to build form and a timber-based build form is a very detailed cost breakdown on a timber and a meter square rate on the concrete. Because historically, the cost plan knows exactly that kind of structure, it costs you X $100 per meter square. So, and I found it's always intriguing to see a cost plan with, 180 pages on the cost plan, which has got one line item for superstructure. So it's that's certainly another big challenge, and this independently if that's mass timber or things or approaches which cost planners or builders haven't done before.
Yeah.
So how can we inject trust and belief into these parties?
Right. With your presentation there about the sample of the Parkville building, you share the same view. That's what's the thing about this? For the timber can contribute more with the low mid-rise.
Well, I think Andrew covered a lot of this before. If a 3-rise walk-up was in a deemed to satisfy document that it could be built by regulation, we would take a lot of the noise out of this. And echoing what Carl said, I've been sat in meetings with developers, and typically there's a fire engineer there, an acoustics person there. There is the architect, the structural engineer, and others there. It only takes one in that group to be nervous about timber, or they don't know timber, so they'll be nervous about it, to tip the developer's hand to go back to what they know. And I've seen that get to the 11th hour so many times. And then, as Carl said about the specification, it all gets too hard. It all gets too hard and someone's not very comfortable. And if the builder's not used to building it, he or she will bump up the price to add lots of contingencies to the price. And so that's been one of the difficulties. I remember years ago, Andrew mentioned stick framing in Perth, and we couldn't understand why the frame and truss industry didn't make big footholds in Perth and transfer all the roofs to frame and truss like the eastern states. And then when you spoke to people, they said, well, we've never done it, so we don't know what it is. We don't have the trades to do it. We don't have this. We don't have the skills to do it. So it's all too hard. And they have stayed with the pitched roof framing. And I think that's the case here. It only takes one in the development team. So going back to Carl's comment, Australand, this was going to be their signature building right across the country. They were going to build this out in the 3Ms, mid-city, mid-rise, mid-suburb attitude. But then the developer was driving this concept. And as soon as Frasers took them over and became product agnostic, some of these projects did fall away. So to summarize, there's not the skills that perhaps we need, and unless the developer specifically wants it, it's probably not going to happen.
Right. So that's good insight. Andrew, any further comments with this?
Yeah, okay. Well, I didn't mention inside of my presentation, and this particular subject would take a webinar by itself. It might take a 2-day conference by itself. So to cut to all the previous colleagues are all right, but I'll boil it down a little bit more. Is that we forget that our current timber market is very much attuned to the domestic supply, and it does it extremely well. So we should all pat ourselves on the back that we do it really, really well in that thing. When you're supplying to the commercial market, it needs a giant rethink in how you approach it. It's not it doesn't have the supply chain as familiar as it does as in the domestic markets. So you kind of like, and a little bit, we do, and a product which does well in the commercial building market is mass timber, because it is going directly from the manufacturer to the building site, and so there's less people in the way. It needs to be involved in it. Well, and it's not a part of the domestic supply. So I think we kind of like got to look at it and say, our business, if we want to get into that market, then we need to look at how our supply chain changes to meet that market, because they're a different beast. The commercial builders, they're not the same as a house builder, and they have larger contracts and larger penalties if you don't comply. And a lot of the market, and domestic market, just doesn't want to deal with it because it's just too hard. So we need a little bit more time and more thought about that. There is no one activity you can do to and get into that market. But I do know that timber frames is the cheapest way of building apartment buildings around the world. Okay, and I looked at the US market and I asked them what's their offsite market like in the apartment building market, and they said, yeah, we've got a huge offsite. We build all our buildings offsite, and he pointed to the concrete slab next door and said we build them all there, and then we transfer them across. So a lot of their success in the US is not offsite; they're still stick building, a lot of it. Okay, and that so the supply comes from the merchant to the building site instead of a convoluted supply path. So lots of look at the supply chains when trying to say, and you need a specific one for the commercial building market compared to domestic supply.
Yeah. Now I have one here from the email asking about the cost breakdown of housing. I think that it has been covered from Carl's presentation, but 70% of the labor cost and 30% of material, because we don't want to have any misinterpretation here. But what happens in the construction index that keeps growing, but I think that Nathan can confirm about the price of timber that pretty much right now a bit stable. It's not like what happens in 2 years before. I think that just to confirm, because the question here in the email said that when we expecting again the cost to build the house will increasing because of the material. Carl, can you confirm is that coming from the labor structure or the material?
So obviously, the numbers I have been referring to are averaged out. So I have been doing analysis in the past, and you see typically a response is 60-40, 60% labor, 40% material input. Once you unpack trade by trade or kind of task by task, you find actually quite a big variety, and then it depends as well on the building type and the materials. For example, drywalls. I did a very detailed exercise there. I found actually it was more likely, depending on the type of drywall, 1 sheet of plasterboard, 2 sheet of plasterboard, etc., what kind of insulation in between. You see sometimes 82% cost labor and 18% cost material. So and then saving actually time in the execution, then suddenly you create a big dent, because the material component is very low, where in other areas it's more likely a 50-50 situation. So 60-40, 70-30, somewhere in that region sits probably the truth. And then it's dependent as well on material cost fluctuation.
Right. Nathan, if you see that, we know that in our industry with the range of the products with the price right now, we think that the construction index that increasing really high, that affecting everything here in Australia especially, that translates to our industry. Is that like the ideal at the moment price? Do you have any view that it's supposed to be next year, if there's any pick up with this bottleneck, timber price supposed to be at this level? Any view with that, Nathan?
I think the pricing is stable currently. I think certainly the entire industry is under inflationary pressures. We've had energy quadruple at our sites, labour costs and whatnot. So the margins have absolutely compressed. So yeah, at some point, I'm I'm sure not the only ones looking for an increase in the future. When, you know, again, crystal ball stuff, when that might be. But for now, it's definitely, you know, we're just looking for pricing stability.
Craig, what about yours, but these engineering wood products?
Eric, I'm just going to jump in there.
Right.
Just to be careful, that you're talking about there's things which might be breaching Australian consumer law, so we shouldn't really be talking about pricing.
I think that it just I have a few because we're just addressing the question about the housing construction index here. But yeah, let's leave it that at the back. I think there's one last that we need to discuss here is about the sustainable of the timber industry. Just a general comment about the because part of this study is just we want to address but housing affordability. We want to highlight that you know, we have the capacity. We know that we never been built, as the previous webinar, we never been built 1.2 million houses. But in the panel here, what's your view in general? Just like a short, like a summary for now. What's we need to do from our industry, you know, to address this? It just sort of for the objective for the summary of this study. I think one by one. I'd like to start from Evan, if you want to have a first comment.
Andrew, you go first.
Anything, Andrew, please feel free if you want to have
the question, just boil the question down again, sorry.
It's just to summarize about this, you know, in the perspective of our industry. We know that we have the capacity, we innovate, we have the capabilities to address these issues. What's your view for the sustainable, especially for the next 2 to 5 years, what the industry can offer and to address this issue, the ongoing issue?
Okay, it's interesting. And again, an unshameful plug for the Timber Construct conference. So one of the subjects I've got to talking about is, you know, if the timber industry is going to be one of the saviors of the world with the climate change, then where the heck is it going to get all those products from? And one of the things is that we have a great lumber-based product thing, which is sometimes can be classified as a bit inefficient. But there are products that are down the stream, which are 10, 15 years away when probably we'll need them, which are going to utilize a lot more of the log. You know, you look at LVL, it uses 60 to 70% of the log already, and there's products which are even higher, 80 to 90%. So they're going to be coming to. And the other thing, which is, you know, it's one of the things that Nathan mentioned, is that we haven't got the saw log availability in Australia, but we have actually got a lot of wood. You know, people don't realise that building materials only make up 10 to 15% of the forest. The other 85% of it is pulp and paper and other applications. You know, pulp and paper is not as active as it used to be. So a lot of our new fibres are going to come from that area. So I actually see there's plenty of opportunity, but we need to change the type of products. You know, and we're going to go to more and more engineered wood products. And just recently, you know, there's products like cross strand lumber, strand timber panels, and you know, even scrimber, which was invented in Australia. You know, both of these products were invented in Australia, are now becoming discussion points around the world. So you'll see that the nature of the beast will change. We'll come away from the sawn products more to the fiber-based products, and they'll sort out our needs. So don't be fearful. What the demand always seen is, one thing I learned about life is that if there's demand out there, you know, people will come up with a product. So it's so don't be fearful. You know, we'll be able to solve that problem, or the demand and dollars will make those products affordable. So look at that being it's quite opportunist in the future.
Carl?
Yeah, I only can echo Andrew's comment there. He referred to scrimber and cross-laminated strand lumber, CL, SL, and others, and rightly so, referred to, invented in Australia, but now finding a foothold in America. And scrimber finding application in Switzerland and other places. So it will come back. It really boils down, and Andrew rightly referred to already, to the log conversion. So it's kind of getting more out of the log will provide one of the answers. The other part is really entering into not only kind of, you know, forward planning, but looking into as well, what can we do with the residual material or the offcuts or the waste. Yeah. This sounds like a small number, but it can be adding up, and there's some research projects out there optimizing actually timber framing material for housing and bringing typology of house and framing material together. Because if you reduce the amount of frame by 10% on a house, what does it mean across the entire pipeline? It's actually quite huge. So that additional material available to the market, as well as kind of looking into, can we differentiate between structural and non-structural graded timber in the framing exercise? Does the knocking need to be structurally graded, or can this be non-structural graded, etc., in different applications? Being more aware and making best use out of the structural graded timber in comparison to non-structural graded timber.
Greg, quick summary.
I just have to echo, the guys have covered it pretty well. The one I was going to mention was residual and preservative treated timber. We should not call that a waste. We should be relabeling that as a resource that we can use to rephrase that. And I think one of the threats, though, that we see a little bit is some climate change effects, where some places the winters aren't cold enough to kill off the bugs, and there's a massive kill off of forests and stuff. I think that's a bit of a concern. And so we have to change our mind on that a little bit. But no, I think the guys have got it covered. Making most use of every gram of wood fibre that we've got, whether that's mixing them with one of our enemy products to still use it. I think we have to be very pragmatic in this space to get. I forget what you saw, Andrew, in that sheet, in that book. Was it 70% wood fibre or something, or in that composite you showed? I think we have to make sure that we don't go, we're purists, we only timber. No, if we mix it with a little bit of Portland cement, we actually get a better product in the end, and we get best use of a wood fibre. So we just got to be a bit careful that we don't lock ourselves into something that sends us down a blind alley.
Nathan, any of you?
Look, you know, we weren't the only building materials that struggled during COVID, and I think if anything, the 1.2 million homes target, you know, it's created the right discussion, you know, bottlenecks, forward planning, and for me, it's about continuing to work together, look at opportunities, and chip away at that.
Right, so it's time, sorry, 1 minute to 3. Well, and on behalf of the FWPA Health, Built Environment, Statistics, Economics program here, we would like to appreciate all the panel experts here. A lot of information. Pretty much, this will be my, job to summarize into our report, short report to provide our members, our audience, to address this, this ongoing issue. You can see that everything's in the news right now, always talking about housing, but what our industry can contribute in here. Again, thank you very much. Just for a reminder, next week we have the third, that's the last webinar. It is covering the stakeholder perspective, for the initiative. We understand there's a market failures in terms of economics in the supply chain, and to address that, there's a intervention and how the intervention will be effective, bridging between the perspective of general. In the first webinar, we have the industry perspective webinar here, and that will complete all the reports. Again, thank you for the sharing your knowledge and insight for Andrew Dunn, Karl-Heinz Weiss, Nathan Calder, and Craig Kay, and also for the audience for this 2 hours webinar. And I'll see you for next week for the third one. And other than that, thanks again. And pretty much have a good day then. Thank you.